like to thank Gleim and Sporties for sponsoring this episode of the More Right Rudder podcast. This episode is brought to you by Gleim Aviation, the leading provider of aviation training materials pilots everywhere have trusted for more than 45 years. Their digital pilot examiner, Otto, is making waves as a brand new AI-powered way to prepare for your check ride. And Gleim CrossCheck, their online ground school record-keeping companion, just expanded to include Part 141 and Part 61 programs. If you want to learn how to fly safely, effectively, and affordably, or teach others how, choose Gleim. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of More Right Rudder, the podcast of the National Association of Flight Instructors. My name is Sarah Stout. I'm the Program Development Manager here at NAFI and your host for this podcast. Joining us today is Chris Penningroth. Chris is the leader of our brand new special interest group on eVTOL and powered lift. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Sarah. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited you reached out to me to start this SIG group. This is such a dynamic and growing area of aviation as a whole, but then flight instructors are going to come into the picture as this grows, and we're already here to an extent. So to get started, talking about kind of where the future of flight instruction will go with this, start with telling us a bit about your background, what got you into aviation and what got you into powered lift or an eVTOL.
Oh, great. That's a great question. Thank you, Sarah. I got my start in aviation, well, like most kids at an air show. In my particular case, it was Scott Air Force Base around the early 1980s. The space shuttle flew over our house, and then that was the big attraction to go to the air show. And I got to see all the jets and all the airplanes, and thought, oh wow, this is cool. Maybe this is what I want to do for a living. Come 1990 or so, I got my private pilot's license, and I kind of got my dream job. I ended up in the Air Force, and I ended up flying F-16s for a good chunk of that time. So that was pretty much the highlight of my aviation career so far. But I went to what was then the University of Missouri at Rolla. It's now the Missouri Science and Technology University, and I got a degree in aerospace engineering. And I remember talking to the then president of the AIAA chapter, that's the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And my idea at the time, because I wasn't sure I was going to get into the Air Force, was how could I help bring aviation to the masses? And fast forward to today, we're finally having realistic conversations about, air taxis or advanced air mobility, as the FAA calls it. So it's almost like, in a sense, I had the one dream of being a military fighter pilot, and now the next dream is possibly within reach. And I'm really excited about that.
It is a really cool area to watch, especially as all these electric vehicles are being developed kind of, in tandem with, electric cars and all sorts of other vehicles. So seeing how these new technologies are being applied and bringing that to the masses, and as you say, and making these technologies more accessible. But advanced air mobility and eVTOL, so the electric vertical takeoff and landing.
Right.
Those are kind of like, to me, those are like the exceptions. They're like so super cool. Like, how are we for, like electric cars have been around. Yeah, sure, there's technology advancements, but to actually be flying people around with this, like in these completely revolutionary devices, is really.
Yeah, that's
What was it with the eVTOL that brought you to say, hey, let's start talking about this more and educating more flight instructors about this?
okay. The That was actually just kind of a natural outgrowth of the knowledge that the electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft were going to be available. The next thought was people are going to probably initially not be comfortable without an actual pilot on board. So that means there's going to have to be a pilot. That means people are going to have to teach the pilots how to fly these things. So that's where the nexus with this idea and the Association of Flight Instructors comes in.
Yeah, so we appreciate you bringing that and starting the group. So let's talk about where flight instruction is in these devices now, because we're seeing quite regularly in the news that, this company had a successful test flight, or this one had a manned flight or an unmanned flight, all these types of things. But the goal of all of these companies is for this to be a widespread activity and a widespread technology.
Very
So,
widespread.
right now we're kind of laying the foundations on what instruction in these aircraft is going to look like, because these are so radically different from anything we're doing today.
Right. Yeah, the one hopes that as the aircraft go through tests, then there are folks who are specialized in developing training syllabi are following along the test and getting with the test pilots and saying, okay, how did we do this? I'm reasonably certain I didn't get to go to test pilot school myself, unfortunately. That was another dream of mine. But uh, yeah, learning how that interface between the test programs work and then the development of the syllabus works. Right now, from the FAA's documentation and publicly available information, we know that I believe it's Joby Aviation and Archer Aviation, at least those two have approval for academies. So they appear to be training their own pilots right now. And the the question though is how when we as instructors on the flight line are approached, how do we teach them how to fly these? So I initially indicated that the masses were who I was targeting with this technology. However, one of the fellows in the SIG brought up a very good point. He said, "Well, it's likely to be wealthy individuals who have the money to actually purchase one of these machines, which look like they're going to cost around 5 million a piece, possibly." Yeah. Uh, so the wealthy individual shows up at the flight line with his brand new eVTOL and says, "Hey, teach me how to fly this," to the local FBO's flight instructors. Well, okay, well, how do we deal with that? And I guess to borrow a fighter pilot bit of jargon, I was trying to lead turn that that potential event, if you will,
Mhm.
and get ahead of that, so we can hopefully come up with a program for the line instructors to have handy when somebody approaches them and asks them that question.
Right, because that's an event that's nearly inevitable. It's only
Exactly.
a function of time, in my personal opinion, as these technologies become certified or more widely available. And yeah, they could just show up on the ramp. And these aren't aircraft that are going to be expected to operate, within some magic bubble or something like that. They're just like any other aircraft. We've integrated drones. Light sport came around, and all sorts of aircraft are already out there. And there's no reason to believe that these wouldn't also need to be integrated in the broader airspace and training community as well. I certainly agree with the person who brought up that this probably will start off with the wealthy and come on down from there over time. That's just a path we've seen a lot of new technologies take. So that's
Yeah, that's exactly
nothing,
right.
yeah, nothing earth-shattering or new about that. 5 million's a chunk of change, for the average person. Is that's just out of the range. So getting flight instructors into this, because I'm a fixed wing flight instructor. There's rotorcraft flight instructors out
Hmm.
there. You mentioned this FAA guidance document. This was a rulemaking document that came out last fall.
Hmm.
We can put a link to
October.
it in the show notes. If you have a lot of time to spare, this thing's what, like 800
I
pages?
I think it was 880 pages.
Yeah, so it's a monster on how all this is going to go. I've kind of read some highlights. I have definitely not read all 800 and some odd pages of it. But one thing to note that document did say is that when these aircraft come out, the current plan, which of course there's always potential could change through other rulemaking and policy changes, is that these aircraft will all be in the powered lift category and require a type rating.
Yeah.
So that's a different animal. That's not, a customer showing up on the ramp with a Mooney and you only have Cessna experience and you got to kind of call around and figure some things out, and
Yeah, you're going
this
to have
is
to
an
go to school
entirely different animal.
specifically for that particular airplane. Yeah.
Hmm.
And like you intimated, there are elements of fixed wing and there are elements of rotary wing. So that's going to be way different to all of us, you know, private pilot single engine land um, type folks. It's going to be different to the rotary wing community.
Hmm.
I think the people who are going to benefit immediately are probably the ex-military V-22 pilots, who at least have some experience with the tilt rotor.
Yeah, there are a handful of civilian pilots out there with powered lift ratings, but I don't know if that's even attainable in the civilian world. The individuals I know of all did like the military transition where you get your FAA certificates
Mhm.
out, based on your military certificates. So how is the FAA bringing the powered lift world to civilians and these companies that are developing these?
Yeah, that's everybody's question, I think, right now. And if we can't figure out how to just do the training on the line, then right now it appears the only instruction is to go through the companies. Or the only way to get instruction on the particular aircraft is to go through the companies. And how does one get invited to do that? That's uh, probably a big question on a lot of our minds right now.
Hmm.
A lot of us would love to do it, and a lot of us would love to find somebody else to pay for it.
Wouldn't we all? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, there's so many questions, so few answers right now. And part of developing this special interest group was really an attempt to see if we could find experts to join in and then cobble something together. And the one of the I mentioned this in the SIG. One of the fantastic things these days is generative AI,
Hmm.
and generative AI is not going to come up with all the answers for us, but we're going to be able to put, the pilot instructor's handbook, and if the companies will allow us to take their technical manuals, we can use those as prompts, and then, hey, I need to write a syllabus and prompt the Gen AI engine and see what it gives us. And we as experts will have a better idea how to, whether the generative AI is hallucinating, telling us something totally wrong, or whether, oh, hey, this looks like it could be could be right. So I think interestingly, bringing this one new technology out, the eVTOLs, at about the same time as generative AI is going to probably result in faster training programs coming out. That's my hope anyway, and I'm
Yeah,
going to see what I
that's
can
a
do to
good insight there
help
because
bring it.
as more and more training outlines and even schools are grappling with how to integrate AI. That this was a
Mhm.
topic at the NAFI summit that we had in January in Daytona Beach. We talked about this and different, like universities are allowing their students to incorporate AI in different ways
Mhm.
and for this content and knowledge creation and you brought up a couple of good points too. With AI can just hang a left and invent stuff.
Yeah.
So definitely the need to be picky. And one of the things I like to use AI for, is just to see what it comes up with. And sometimes, even if it is making stuff up, you can be like, well, that's also a good question. How does that work? Maybe it spit out something that is completely completely nonsense, but like, well, we do still need to tackle that question.
To some extent, the generative AI is prompting us. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I've used it substantially for project management, and my wife uses it in her law firm. And the obvious hallucination cases where it just invents a case and refers to that. So, yeah, that's there are a lot of people worried that AI is going to take our jobs. No, not. Not yet, anyway.
It has a ways to go. Yeah, it may have
Yeah,
some capabilities, in a repetitive, very narrow scope, you could get it to do that. But on this broad scale stuff, like creating these training syllabi and
right.
understanding what it's going to take to get your average flight instructor spooled up in one of these completely different types of aircraft and
Yeah.
and
Or
and safely
building the
going in
slides
it.
for
Yeah,
your ground
AI is
school
going to have.
lessons.
I'm sorry?
So, and building the slides for your ground school lessons. A friend of mine has already done that. Um, Not in the flight instruction category, but a
Hmm.
different area. He's letting AI do his PowerPoint, and it looks good. It comes up with reasonable situations and graphics. So
Nice.
yeah. So if we my one of my hopes is that if we can get the information from the companies, at least even if it's sanitized to whatever degree it needs to be, then we can start building our kind of generic syllabi. And when we were in the group meeting, I I mentioned from a I'm going to use the cybersecurity world for right now. Or just information technology in general. The companies have their own proprietary training. So Microsoft has its training for Windows, Cisco will have its training for routers, and if you go through that training, you'll get certified on, a Cisco router or Microsoft Windows or whatever the case is. But to some extent, there's a little bit more, maybe a little bit higher level of prestige with what they're calling non-vendor specific certifications. And so, and I was talking about cybersecurity earlier. I went through CompTIA's Security Plus cybersecurity training, and theoretically, if you pass that, you have a little idea how to do cybersecurity with Linux or with Windows or with Cisco or just anything. So, in that sense, taking that idea and moving it into flight instruction, how with so many different platforms out there that may need type readings, what can we do to facilitate instruction in as many of them as possible, so so that we're kind of the vendor non-specific training and hopefully a little bit higher level. But at the end of the
Right.
day, there folks are going to have to go to the companies and learn the specifics of that platform.
Yeah,
As,
to start learning. And that's kind of what the Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge and, the Airplane Flying Handbook and all that kind of do now. It teaches you like, well, this is what an attitude indicator is. This is what an airspeed indicator is. But the one in the airplane you're flying is going to look different than the one in the book, a bit. The
yeah,
numbers, may look different. It might be electronic. It might be this manufacturer, that manufacturer, all those types of things. And I would think that there's some commonalities, even considering how wildly different the designs and assuming operation of these devices. 'Cause like you said, the manufacturers are keeping a pretty tight lip. That there's going to be, some similar considerations, at least in like the policy and safety side that people could get spooled up on. You're going to have common airspace rules. You're going to
hmm
have, this is how you integrate into an airport or a vertiport or some things to think about in the emergency sector,
yeah, that's right.
weather low. I don't have any experience on electric aircraft, so I'm thinking like I don't know, there's got to be some red blinky light that's the low oil pressure equivalent. You're on reserve power or you're getting down to whatever percentage power.
Yeah,
I'm
or
just making that up as I go, so if that's wrong.
abnormal operations, it's still going to be aviate, navigate, communicate. So that's going to
Hmm.
be common no matter what. Obviously, the folks will have to refer to, Section 3 of the Dash 3 or whatever the equivalent is for their particular tech data once you get into the specifics of the emergency. But until you've figured out what's going on, well, are these aircraft going to have a clock to wind? That was the classic thing I was taught.
Hmm.
When as at the start of the emergency, recognize what's going on, wind the clock, take a minute, figure out what's going on. But these things are going to have different failure modes. And I was
Hmm.
watching I think it was Joby Aviation's. YouTube channel, and they had to intentionally during their test program shut down one of the motors. How does the rest of the system react? Can the other five motors pick up the load? And the answer is yes. Uh, Obviously, it's probably required for certification, is my guess.
Right, yeah, I would hope it would be, on these multi-rotor things that one
Yeah.
one failure isn't a complete.
So yeah, so there are all sorts of things that I think we can do as an instructional organization to kind of prep the field for what's coming. At the end of the day, I don't think we're going to be the final answer for the most part, unless we get to the point where, with these aircraft, where there's some generic standard, some open source, if you will,
Mhm.
borrowing another analogy from the computer world, and we've got hobbyists just building these open source versions of eVTOLs in their garages. That may be a problem we can solve or help them, or with the light sport category,
Hmm.
where it's not too specific, doesn't may not require a type rating, but yeah. At this point, it's so new, we just don't know.
Yeah, will there be an experimental offshoot at
Yeah.
some point? And as these technologies evolve, just like we saw, with all other types of aircraft, and it will take time, but eventually the market brought the tools and the knowledge and the resources and the the materials, thinking like your engines, your cables, your structural components, all of that came down to all the way down to the home built experimental level. And so,
Wow.
of course, over time, this first generation of these vehicles will phase out. Technology is going to continue to advance. I think that's a given.
Hmm.
And and so then what happens with these vehicles? Will they trickle down further down the market to maybe those who can afford a used eVTOL instead of, like we said, it's in my opinion only a function of time until the person who can afford, maybe that first gen eVTOL 10, 15 years from now shows up on the ramp and says, "Hey, check this out." And
Yeah.
the test pilot flew me here, but it's all mine now.
Yeah, that was the question was going through my mind. Well, okay, well, how is this thing going to be delivered if I can't fly it? Yeah, somebody else will have to fly it in.
Yeah, so and we see that now with aircraft. I mean, I used to fly a Mirage for a family that no, they weren't pilots. They just bought the aircraft. And so they had it was part of a dealer network, but yeah, the
Okay.
dealer network and their pilots flew the airplane to where it was going to be based, and then they flew in an instructor, and the pilots did our training on site with the instructor they flew in, did our flying in the aircraft, and everyone went home. So, those models exist, they're in, generally in those higher end aircraft now, but no reason for, at this point to rule out that that wouldn't be how this could go in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, yeah, I think you're right about the technology. That's battery technology is what it is, but it's getting better. And Archer Aviation, I think, partnered with Anduril, and they're working on a hybrid version. So now we're
Mhm.
adding it's an electric VTOL, but it also has an internal combustion engine. So we're mixing the technologies together. Woo! It's going to be exciting.
Right, yeah. And so then that's a whole other can of worms. Is that combustion engine there for reserve or emergency use? Is it intended to be something that's used regularly? Then you get into how often do you train pilots if it is only for that emergency use? Because of course there is some value in having that, I guess we'll call it older, existing, this chemical-based technology instead of electron-based technology.
Yeah.
It's a proven technology. So if it can be there and work it, if something happened, I don't know.
So,
Left my crystal ball in the cabinet today. But all those things are super cool and all things that we could come up in your SIG meetings because of course this industry and what's going on in the training world for eVTOL is moving at lightning speed.
yeah. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting time trying to make sure the community is able to keep up with these changes. And yeah, and I don't want instructors to be surprised if the situation develops that you just explained, where somebody drops an eVTOL onto the ramp and here they come knocking on the FBO's door looking for training on this thing. So
Right.
at
Yeah.
least at the very minimum, I want a place where people can go to look for information and where instructors can go to look for information and at least find it initially, and then here's what we can do for you, and here's the limit of what we can do for you, and at once you've hit this limit, then you're going to have to go talk to who built this. Was it a Joby Aviation? Was it an Archer Aviation? Was it something else entirely? 'Cause if this pans out, then you're going to have more entrants into the market, I think, that
Yeah,
nobody's heard
and
of, and and then that's another thing is, uh, well, maybe the landscape has changed, but when the cheap knockoffs from potential other not so friendly countries start showing up, um, uh, you bought a what? You may want to think about getting a refund on that.
yeah, then once you start getting into, that understanding that type certificate and does this aircraft have a type certificate? Of course, it should
Should it? Yeah,
to be here, but yeah, like I said, as soon as something's certified on the market, there's nothing stopping someone from buying it and taking it apart for the for the most
yeah,
part and figure, it's a lot cheaper to do the engineering backwards. And
yeah. True
so.
statement. Um, and there are companies over in that other country that I'm alluding to, but not saying that they're working on building these things as well.
Hmm.
There's a chance that they end up with a good, decent quality product. Amateur radio is a good example. There's a particular radio from that company or from that country that almost everybody uses, and it seems decently reliable. It's much cheaper than the like the Japanese equivalents, but yeah, it's kind of like everybody's got one. That that may be the way some people enter the market. They get initial training on this less expensive one, and I don't know, maybe flight schools feel like they can afford the less expensive one, and
Hmm.
they start buying them for their own stable, and then hey, we've got, yeah, kind of like when we first walked out onto the ramp and saw that Cessna 152, and wow, I really want to fly this Cessna 182, but and the instructor correctly moved us. Okay, hey, we'll get to that later once you've.
We're a few parking spots down. Yep.
Yeah. So that one's high performance, complex. You're not ready for that yet. Trust me. Um, Come on over here for a flight in this 152 or this PA-28, and that'll be sufficient.
Hmm.
Trust me, it'll be fun.
Yeah, so to get you started. And then,
Yeah.
we have to recognize that the instructor market and landscape is going to change on this too, because of course, right now all these manufacturers are training up their own instructors, and like you said, they're working with their engineers to figure this out and presumably doing a fair bit of computer modeling and all that before they even fly, but then learning
Hmm.
the techniques because of course you're going to learn things once it's out there. Those individuals are going to change firms. They're going to retire. They're going
Hmm.
to do all sorts of things, that could then where they could bring that knowledge down, or
Yeah.
at least in broad strokes, there might be, of course, things that prevent them from sharing specific knowledge, but they say,
Right.
hey, in my experience with this, these types of failures are possible, or this type of event or phase of flight proved to be trickier for teaching. Kind of like how we always talk about, like, okay, cruise isn't it's pretty easy phase of flight to teach once you get the trim figured out, but
Hmm.
those that third of a second between landing when you've got to rotate and get the wings in, and you've got to fly around the patch each time to get them to practice that third of a second. Um,
Mm.
those types of moments, they can bring that technology or that knowledge rather, into the broader instructional landscape.
That's a very good point. And you also started talking about simulators, and I wanted to touch that point,
Yeah,
so to speak.
simulators.
So. since a lot of these aircraft are electrical, the mock-ups I think are probably going to be very similar, obviously, to the aircraft themselves. And I know the Air Force is using heavy simulator use up until like uh, going back to my friends who were flying the C-17. Everything that they did with the C-17 was in the simulator right up until their check ride. Their very first flight in the aircraft was the check ride. So yeah, no pressure or anything,
Right?
but the C-17 community is a bunch of top-notch pilots. So it's working. So what level of simulation are we going to be able to use? Maybe training is not as expensive as we're afraid of, and maybe a lot of this type rating can be done on a simulator until, check ride time.
Hmm. And even
And
today, a lot of airplane type ratings are done in the simulator.
you know that and maybe there's going to be a generic simulator cockpit or so that we can modify to look like an Archer or a Joby, and maybe it's actually less expensive to do some of the training for this. Again, a little bit speculative. Don't know the answer to this, but
Well,
with
even if it's
technology,
more expensive, it might be a better choice because of the risk. Um,
maybe.
you're not gonna crash a simulator, or you're not risking life and limb in a simulator. So even if it is more
True.
expensive for these emerging technologies, the cost benefit might still
Very true.
still be there for using simulation to learn these hard lessons, or to bring up this initial group of instructors.
That was
Do
one of the
that.
great things about the simulator. You talking about going around the pattern to practice this one-third of a second flare technique. With the simulator, you can just
Mhm.
reset on short final
Right?
and practice. Okay, let's go back, practice, and
Hmm.
you can accomplish at least the muscle memory portion of it, um, because it's always different in the airplane. And whenever I'm teaching simulators, I try to point out, especially when I'm working with a government customer, hey, it may seem like you're saving a lot of money here, but trust me, it's when you get into the airplane and it's your body on the line, then yeah, it's just different.
Yeah, yeah. As much as we try to teach this or to treat the simulator like an aircraft, and this is real, you do always kind of have that nugget back there
Right.
that the person behind you has a big pause button. And
Yeah.
so,
Um, and I've seen some similar techniques where you encourage a student to do something incorrect to see what can happen. So like we pitching in for lessons learned, as it were.
mhm,
Um,
yeah. So certainly, and you can surprise them with things you couldn't do.
yeah, and most emergency training is done in the simulator.
Yeah, yeah. So.
So,
All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I am so
yeah,
excited to keep this SIG group going, and I would certainly encourage people to join. Now, the SIGs
definitely.
are a NAFI member benefit, so you do have to be a member of NAFI, log into our platform at my.nafimentor.org, and you can join the group from there. All the information on how to jump on the monthly meeting is in that group, and this is a super exciting one. Chris, what is your meeting schedule?
It's the first Wednesday of every month, and I believe we're normally going at 8 o'clock Central Time, so
Okay.
9 o'clock Eastern.
Yep. Cool. All right. So, if you're already a NAFI member, log in, join the group, check it out. There's already some fun discussions going in the group, other members getting to know each other. And if you're not a NAFI member, go ahead and join. We're happy to have you. You do not have to be a flight instructor to join NAFI. So if you are simply interested in this or any of our SIGs as an up and coming pilot or an interest, we're happy to have you, and you're more than welcome to participate in this.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'd love to have more participants.
Yeah, so
And
you had a great first meeting,
yes,
and so we're looking forward to many more. So, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to come on More Right Rudder today, and who knows, maybe we'll follow up at some point in the future and see where this exciting area has grown.
That'll be great. Thank you very much, Sarah. It's
All
been
right.
awesome. It's been a great privilege.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the More Right Rudder podcast. Be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode. If you aren't already a NAFI member, please consider joining us. All are welcome. You can learn more at our website, joinnafi.org. And don't forget, you can save $5 on your new or renewal membership by using the code PODSAVE5.